Friendship isn't the big things, it's a million little things. Hello there, friends, and welcome to this, another episode of A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is where we break down and discuss episodes of TV shows that you may not have even heard of. I believe these TV shows need a little more love, and that is what this platform is here to do. Each week we will be covering different shows from all over the globe. We'll be breaking down each episode, giving you the main highlights, and going through it bit by bit. But for now, I think it's best that we find out what's on the menu today. Hello there, and welcome back to this A Million Little TV Shows podcast. This is now Season 6, Episode 5, and today we are going to be catching up with our favourite psychologist, Hannibal Lecter. But of course, I've got to get the business out of the way first, so please go subscribe to my Patreon. I have now got through the full Season 1 of Game of Thrones over there, and by the time this comes out I'm hoping to have at least got through Season 2 as well, if not more. Over there I'm going to be trying to upload at least once a week, maybe even twice, because they are quite short episodes as opposed to this where it is a lot longer process. But for now we shall see it. It'll be at least one episode a week, because obviously I don't want to neglect this podcast at all. This is my main priority. The other side of that is hopefully a Patreon, which will help me out a little bit. As for today, I have just had a look at the schedule for the rest of this season, and I had to rejig it a little bit. It's all going to be the same shows. I've had to move National Treasure up, and I've had to move Santa Clarita to the end of the season. The reason being I can't really say right now, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks things will be a bit more clear and I can actually tell you what's going on. Hopefully by the time this actually comes out I should know. But anyway, let's get on with today. So this is Hannibal, Season 2, Episodes 10 to 13. Okay, so previously on Hannibal we know that now Will is out of jail, and we know that he is trying to manipulate Hannibal into revealing who he truly is. Like I said at the beginning of the season, we know that Hannibal and Jack have a huge fight, but that hasn't come to prominence as yet. Hannibal has essentially fitted up Frederick Chilton to take the fall for him because he has manipulated Miriam Lass into actually thinking that it was Frederick Chilton who was a kidnapper and not Hannibal, because he's used unorthodox psychological techniques on her. And we have had a new character introduced in the form of Margot Verger, played by Catherine Isabel, and all we know is that she has a tumultuous relationship with her brother, who we can only assume from the books is Mason Verger. And so any time that Hannibal has a session with her, he is constantly trying to make sure that she kills Mason. He advocates for it and tells her it wouldn't be such a bad thing. She has started to compare notes with Will to find out what Will said about him. And of course, Will finds Hannibal's techniques with all his patients very interesting. But anyway, let's get into it. Episode 10, Nakachoco. And so we pick up from where we left off last time with the fact that Will has killed Randall Tier, who was sent by Hannibal to attack him. This was someone who used to be a patient of Hannibal's and essentially started killing people dressed as an animal. But now we see Will's side of things, and as Randall breaks through the glass of his house, we actually see that Will thinks it's Hannibal, or at least Hannibal in this stag-human hybrid that he sometimes sees when he represents Hannibal in his own head. And so, as he begins to take him down, instead of shooting him, he has a shotgun, and that's how we would have thought he would have died earlier. He actually beats him down, and as he does, he ends up breaking his neck. We then come to the reveal of Hannibal coming home and finding Randall on his table, and Will tells him basically an eye for an eye. You tried to kill me, I tried to kill you. This is done now. But Hannibal and Will talk for a while, and Hannibal gets to the bottom of what happened, and he obviously finds out that Will killed this man with his bare hands, and he seems very proud of him. Will says that he's never felt so alive until he actually killed Randall. And so when Hannibal asks, how are you going to honour him? We see Jack walking into the museum where Randall worked, walking up to one of the displays that Randall would have put together and finding Randall's head and some of his other body parts on this what looks to be like a saber-toothed tiger. And at this point, it's hard to believe that Will has done something like this after so long of not doing anything. Since Freddie Lowndes has a story to write about Will, and Will told her that he would give her the exclusive rights to his story, she is now in the process of doing that. But when Will goes over and she starts to talk about the Chesapeake Ripper, Will tells her that the Chesapeake Ripper isn't Hannibal, as they've already established, as the FBI has all the evidence for Dr. Chilton is the Chesapeake Ripper. And when Freddie asks, how can that be when Dr. Chilton isn't a surgeon, and when I spoke to some of his former medical colleagues, they've told me different. They've told me that he was an absolute embarrassment of a surgeon. How can he be the Chesapeake Ripper? Because that person had surgical knowledge and expertise in that field. So even though Freddie is the annoying reporter in this who is just trying to get her website off the ground, she is the one who is actually breaking the news here, because she knows how to do her research. Even though she is a problem at times, she is really getting to the heart of this story. But Will sticks to his guns. Hannibal has a session with Margot, and as he talks to her, she tells him that it doesn't matter what she does to Mason, because their father set it up in the traditional way. So their estate would end up going to Mason, and then if there was no male heir and Mason had died, it would go to a Methodist church or a Baptist church or whatever it was. And so Margot wouldn't even see a cent of it, and that is to be her legacy. But Hannibal tells her, no, your legacy is what you make it, so what do you want your legacy to be? She then heads home, and we finally see Mason for the first time, and he's played by Michael Pitt. And if you've not seen Michael Pitt in things before, he is odd. Good actor. I remember seeing him in a film called Funny Games, and oh my god, that is a brutal film. If you haven't watched it, it's a remake, and I'm aware that the original was as brutal. But yeah, it's a rough going film, so you've been warned if you do want to go watch it. But Michael Pitt is very good in that, and I thought he'd be in a lot more things. And then when I saw him in this, I knew he'd be a perfect fit for this character. But essentially, what Mason's vision is he wants to start feeding humans to pigs while they're alive. Because he knows that pigs will not leave a trace of a human body. And so he's decided to start training pigs, and this is what he's telling Margot at this particular point. And he uses one of her suits and what looks to be some of her perfume, and uses a female scream while the pigs eat. So it's as if he's intimidating her enough to say, I'm going to have my pigs eat you if you step out of line. But this is the kind of sick fuck we are dealing with right now. And then we see that Margot goes to visit Will in what is a pretty intense sex scene between both Will, Margot, but also on the other side, Hannibal and Alana Bloom. Now, due to the fact that Hannibal said that Margot had to create her own legacy, we can only assume that this is what she's doing right now. Sleeping with Will is for one reason and one reason only. It's to get pregnant. Now, Will even says this just before she tries to make a move on him, because he knows that Margot is gay. And so, when he tells her that, I don't think I have the right equipment for you, she proceeds anyway. She's desperate at this point, and she just needs to get a baby inside her to make sure that she can take over once Mason's dead. But of course now she only has a 50-50 chance, and that's even if it takes. Throughout the whole scene is switching between Hannibal and Alana and Margot and Will. But occasionally we end up seeing Will with Alana, which obviously indicates that he still has feelings for her and still wants her. And the fact that she's now with Hannibal is really not something he wants anymore. He's wanted her all along. So since Freddie is not satisfied with the answers that she's getting from Will, she goes to see Alana. And she starts to ask questions that Alana, she's been thinking them, but she hasn't said them out loud. And it's only when she's confronted with these questions that she starts to think Freddie might have something. Freddie asks her about the relationship between Hannibal and Will, and says, don't you think it's strange that how Hannibal has had 7 patients die, 4 when they were in his care, 3 after they'd left his care, and now there's Will. Will hasn't died yet, but he's had all this shit just stirring around him. And then as soon as he comes back out, and after trying to kill Hannibal, he's now back under Hannibal's care, and all of a sudden, someone else has died. And that maybe Hannibal is the teacher, and Will is the student, very much like the relationship used to be between Hannibal and Alana. However, that was actually for psychology. Hannibal, however, has been summoned to go and see Mason Verger. Mason tells him, since I'm paying for my sister's therapy, I thought I should see the man who was actually doing the therapy. And that Mason would be sure that his sister would be saying things about him. Even though she's a pathological liar, Mason doesn't feel like it's fair for her to just be out there saying things about him. Hannibal tells him that, I can't tell you what your sister's been saying, but fortunately for you, I can't tell anyone what your sister has been saying. Which gives Mason the hint of he knows exactly who Mason is. He also tells Mason that maybe he should come for therapy himself, which is a horrifying thought. After all, what Hannibal's done. Hannibal, Will and Alana end up having dinner together. Again, as I always say, Hannibal has to have dinner. And as they're sat talking with each other, Alana brings up the subject of Freddy and essentially says that she's been asking questions about the relationship between the two of them and isn't sure what to think. And Alana starts to ask very similar questions that even though they've had their issues, they now seem to be thick as thieves. Even now, they're doctor and patient, and they're sat in the same room having dinner together. How they've become friends after everything that's gone on, she doesn't understand. But both Hannibal and Will just play it off as that's just who they are. Better the devil you know and all that. But now even Alana is seeming to be suspicious of them both. And speaking of suspicious, Freddy heads out to go and see Will, even though it would seem that in her hotel room at that particular point, Hannibal is in there, all plastic suited, waiting for her. But as for Freddy, she finds that Will isn't home, and she heads out into the back garden. She sees his shed as she picks his lock, and she heads inside. Inside is the animal suit, worn by Randall Tier, and then when Freddy finds a freezer in there, opens that up, she finds the jaw, a human jaw. And when she closes the lid, Will is stood there. Freddy flees, but is eventually caught by Will, just as she is calling Jack. The call goes to answer phone, and all Jack hears on the other end is Freddy screaming as she is pulled from the window of her car. The FBI end up tracing the call and find out that the cell phone tower that it pinged off of was 6 miles away from Will's farm. They know that she'd gone to get gas in the area because they'd seen her on camera, but after that she disappeared. Will tells them that she never turned up at his house. She was meant to, but she didn't. That evening, however, Will goes over to see Hannibal, and he puts some meat on the counter and tells him that they can prepare the meal together. As they start, Hannibal tells him he can slice the ginger. Freddy Lowndes is, after all, a redhead. They continue to flirt in this weird way throughout the whole final act, and all along it seems like Will has not only claimed 1 victim in this episode, but now 2. Episode 11, Ko no Mono. After we see Will and Hannibal having a discussion at a dinner table, we end up seeing a flaming body rolling down a security ramp into a car park. Once they actually get it back to the lab, it seems that the teeth in there are Freddy Lowndes. That's the only thing that they can identify from, and they are Freddy's. The body also seems to have some of its flesh removed, but the rest is just burnt to a crisp. And so we can only assume that it is Freddy. With the fact that the meat that Will took to Hannibal's would match the wound that was on this body, it stands to reason that this is Freddy and Will has killed her. Hannibal ends up having a session with Margot, and while he does, he's sat talking to her about this pregnancy. It turns out that she is pregnant and the baby did take, but now the realisation of that has hit her. But it's only when Hannibal actually starts talking about Will, we realise that Will's in the room with them. And he tells her that you tricked me. I didn't know what that was the other night, and now you've got pregnant. What is it you want from me? And she tells him, nothing, or everything if that's what you want, but I don't need anything from you. Of course, she is hoping that this is a boy, because if it's not, the Methodist Church ends up getting all of her money when Mason dies. Speaking of Mason, this man just starts to get creepier and creepier. Margot's already said that he is no good with kids, and when we actually see him, there is what seemed to be troop of kids walking through his stables, and he's just stood watching them. As he talks to one of the children, as the others move away, he starts to tell them that their parents don't want them, they don't love them, and they are going to get rid of them. And it's all this to make this child cry. And as this child does, he takes out a piece of tissue, wipes the tears from this child on it, and then later we see him downing a martini with the piece of tissue in it. He is a weird, perverse guy. Alana goes to see Will, and she inquires about what happened to Freddie and whether it was Will who killed her. But he neither confirms nor denies it. He essentially says that when I pointed fingers at Hannibal, nobody looked. So point fingers at me, because no one's going to look my way. But before she leaves, he tells her he's got something for her. He gives her a handgun and tells her to keep a box of bullets with her at all times. And essentially, anything that comes her way that is a danger, she needs to take aim at. Hannibal gets a visit from Mason Verger. And while he does, he essentially tells him that during his childhood, he was rough with some children, and that he may have took advantage of them. And so it would seem he has done some terrible things throughout his life. And of course, when Hannibal sees someone like that, he wants to either get to know them as well as possible or take them out. Both Will and Alana end up at the graveside of Freddie Lowndes as the funeral is going on. And Alana asks him, you do know that this is a big trope of the killer. A killer will turn up at the funeral or at the graveside of the person that they've killed. But of course Will knows this. But once again, he doesn't allay Alana's suspicions at all. He just continues with them. Will then goes to see Hannibal. And Hannibal and he have a discussion about the fact that Will has not only taken a life, but also is on the verge of creating life, or in this case has created the start of what would be life, and he's unsure whether he would be a good father. He tells Hannibal that he saw Abigail as someone he could be a father to, or at least a father figure, and Hannibal apologizes for taking that away from him, and essentially tells him that he killed Abigail Hobbs, which up until this point I don't think that he has actually said to Will. And then after Mason sees his sister and essentially threatens her, due to the fact that Hannibal said something during his session, which was that he doesn't have to be the only heir, that maybe procreation could be the way. And if it wasn't him, then maybe Margot, which is something that Hannibal should not be discussing, but obviously it's Hannibal. He likes to watch things basically burn down. He's essentially the Joker. He wants to watch the world burn. And from that conversation, Mason has now got it in his head that Margot is pregnant, or at least planning to be. And so when he sees her, he mentions about maybe there being an heir to their fortune, and that maybe since they have a breeding farm that they should think about doing something along those lines as well. And now Margot starts to worry. And so once he's back in session with Hannibal, Mason tells him that essentially he does not mind torturing his sister, and that he will stick the knife in occasionally. And of course this could imply that he's willing to stick the knife in her if he finds out that she's pregnant. Alana goes to see Hannibal, and when she questions him about what's been going on with Will, he tries to comfort her. But as he does, he kisses her hand, and with that incredible sense of smell that he's got, he smells gunpowder on her. He asks if she's been firing a gun, and she tells him, yeah, I am paranoid and I'm scared. And Hannibal begins to wonder about what she's actually scared of. Speaking of being scared, Margot has decided to run away, but as she drives away from the compound, she gets blindsided. And just as she comes to in her car, we see that the man who's hit her is Carlo, who is essentially the right-hand man of her brother Mason. He takes her back home, and Mason has her set up for surgery. He tells her that he's going to insert something in her that the doctors will need to get out drastically, and that will impact on the fact that she needs her womb removing, because the only person that she is going to be having Mother's Day with is him. So this sick, sadistic bastard is torturing his sister even more. Alana goes to see Jack because she knows something isn't right. She knows that Hannibal is lying, she knows that Will is lying, and she certainly knows that Jack is lying. And when she confronts him about all of this, he tries to defend it all. He tries to defend the fact that there was evidence against Chilton that makes him the Chesapeake Ripper. He tries to defend the fact that he doesn't believe that Will killed Freddie Lowndes, but obviously all the evidence is pointing that way. Jack can see that the game is up and tells her to just come with me. And as she walks through the FBI officers, she walks into another room, and sat in there is Freddie Lowndes. At the hospital now, where Margot is recovering after her operation, Will is essentially standing vigil. Will knows the man who did this, and he goes straight after Mason. In fact, he goes after Carlo first, and then goes after Mason. But when he gets to him, he tells him exactly the reason why they're all in the position that they're now in. He says to him, "You don't realise, but the reason that you did that to your sister is because of Hannibal. The reason your sister did that to me is because of Hannibal. The reason that I'm here is because of Hannibal." Just as Mason tells him that he's going to feed him to his pigs, Will draws a gun, points it at his head and says, "There's only one person you should be feeding to those pigs, and it's Hannibal Lecter." Episode 12, Tome 1. Hannibal has a session with Will, where Will essentially tells him that he has set Mason Verger on him. And when Hannibal asks, Will says, "Well, you want to kill him anyway, so why don't you?" He tells him, "You either want me to kill him or you to kill him, but either way he's going to end up on your table." And he asks Hannibal, does he want to eat him? And Hannibal essentially comes back with the question of, if I did, would you be at the table too? And so he tells Hannibal that essentially Mason Verger is going to be someone's bacon. Hannibal still wonders why Will has still set this in motion. And when Hannibal looks at him, he tells him to envision the thing that he wants to envision about what happens between Hannibal and Mason Verger. And so Will closes his eyes and imagines. But what he imagines is Hannibal in a straitjacket on a hook as Will cuts his throat and sends him to the pigs. And so Mason comes to see Hannibal as well and tells him, "I don't know what kind of game you two are playing, but I don't want to be a part of it." He tells Hannibal that he's always played games with Margot, but she never knew that she was playing. And so he is just trying to figure what Will and Hannibal are doing, because it seems that they are trying to backstab each other as well as trying to get rid of Mason. Will and Hannibal speak to Margot, and the number that they have done on this surgery for Margot, she was told that they could have done this in a very organised manner. I can't remember the name, I think it's laparoscopic, it's probably wrong, but hey ho. But essentially they could have done it sort of keyhole surgery. But Mason told them to leave a scar. So now she has this scar right across her stomach that is going to be pretty much there for the rest of her life. Just a reminder that he did this to her. And so now Will and Hannibal are still conspiring to get rid of Mason just because of the way that he is. But Margot is feeling trapped. She can't see a way out of this, and she knows that if he dies, she gets nothing. And then for the first time in a long time, we see Will interacting with Jack. And Jack is asking him how they're going to prove that Hannibal has done the things that Will says that he's done. Because at the minute, Hannibal is looking pretty clean. And Will tells him that he's giving him nothing, but he does want him to kill Mason Verger. And therefore, if instead Will can get Hannibal to kill Mason Verger, or at least if he can be witness to it, it will potentially be good for both Jack, Will, and of course Mason to witness this whole thing. But then Jack tells him that he's also been fishing around, and the person that he's managed to hook is Bedelia de Maurier, the therapist of Hannibal Lecter. Bedelia tells Will of the night that she encountered the man who attacked her and what actually happened to him. From all reports, it would seem that this man choked on his own tongue, but Bedelia tells him that it wasn't even attached at the time. And so Will starts to believe that it was Hannibal who did this, but Bedelia tells him that it wasn't. It was me who killed him. Hannibal didn't coerce me, he persuaded me to do so. And then asks, has he ever tried to persuade you to do so? And Will doesn't get a chance to answer before she says, he will, and it will be someone you love, and you'll think that you're doing it for the right reasons. So when Will asks, how do we catch him? Bedelia essentially tells him that he is very self-congratulatory, and he thrives off that. He thrives off the fact that he's outsmarted everyone, and it's then that you'll catch him, because he will do something silly by being the smartest person in the room. Will speaks to Hannibal and essentially tells him that since he's been under his care, he feels that he has now lost Abigail, lost even the thought of having a child, alienated himself from Alana and Jack, and so he can only have one thing in his life, and that's Hannibal. But he sees that Hannibal is as lonely as he is, and so they're just being lonely together. And obviously if they lose each other, they're just going to be alone. Bedelia speaks to Jack and asks if he still believes that Hannibal is the killer, because all she's ever seen him do is influence people. And Jack tells her, yeah, I do. I have to. But when she suggests that maybe he isn't, and that if he is, and if he even suspects that you're coming for him, you've already lost. Essentially, she tells Jack that don't get ahead of yourself. Don't think you've already caught him, because he is playing you. Will gets picked up by Mason at his home, and it seems like Mason just wants to have a talk with him, but then he takes him off in his car. And then we see Hannibal sat in his office. Mason's right-hand man, Carlo, walks in with two other men, one being behind Hannibal at this point. Of course, Hannibal knows what he's doing, and he picks up his scalpel that's on his desk for sharpening pencils, and probably other things. For instance, this. And when the man behind him swings for him, Hannibal ducks, sticks the scalpel in his thigh, knowing exactly where to hit, and then goes after the other two. He takes them down swiftly, but eventually numbers catch up with him, and of course a stun gun. The man with the scalpel in his thigh ends up pulling it out and bleeding out everywhere. The next time we see Hannibal, it's only the two men with Mason Verger, and Will is there also. And we get the same scene from the beginning of the episode, apart from the fact that there are three other men there. Hannibal is hung up and is going to be fed to the pigs. However, when Will is given the knife, he cuts Hannibal free, hoping to witness what Hannibal does, but Carlo has already got to Will at this point and smashed him in the head, leaving him unconscious. By the time Will wakes up, he is surrounded by blood, no one else is there, and when he presses the button for the feeder for the pigs, half of a body comes up out of the pig pen, but Will has no idea where anyone else is. Hannibal, however, has obviously taken Mason, but where he's taken him is to Will's place. Gives him a combination of psychedelic drugs, which send him over the edge. But all around his feet, Mason keeps seeing pigs, and when Hannibal asks him to find out how much fat one of the pigs has, he leans in to go and grab one, but Hannibal says no, essentially, you're the pig. Mason just laughs it off, and then we see Will come home. He sees one of his dogs outside, he walks in, and he finds Mason feeding his dogs. When he asks what Mason is feeding his dogs, it is from his own hands, which are blooded and gory, and these are what look to be freshly cut slithers of flesh. Mason comes into the light, and we see that he is carving off bits of his own face and feeding them to Will's dogs. Hannibal then appears, and after some conversation with Will, Mason tells Hannibal that he's hungry. And so Hannibal tells him, well, eat your own nose then. So Mason cuts off his nose, puts it in his mouth and eats it. And here we see how, under this psychedelic drug, how badly Mason is feeling and how badly Mason is under the influence of Hannibal. Eventually, Will tells him, you need to put him out of his misery. I'm not going to do it. He's your patient. I'm not going to kill him. Hannibal walks over and seemingly just snaps his neck as if to kill him. The next time we actually see Mason, he is sat up in his own bed, wired up to a bunch of machines as Jack walks in. He asks about Hannibal and if Mason has ever met Will Graham, and Mason tells him he can't remember anyone called Will Graham. Jack then asks about the accident, and he says, I fell while I was in the pig pen. The pigs ate my face, and I was lucky that my sister found me. Jack leaves with no real leads on what's been going on, and Margot arrives telling him that she is going to look after Mason the exact way that he looked after her, which we know was pretty fucking gruesome. So we can only imagine that she is going to be just as vicious. Hannibal and Will start talking, and Will tells Hannibal he's worried about them getting caught, and that if Jack has been asking questions, which he has, about the fact that maybe Will killed Freddie Lowndes, then he's on to both of them. If he knows that Will did it, he knows that Hannibal knows about it, and he potentially knows that Hannibal did something too. And so Will tells him that maybe it's time for Hannibal to reveal who he truly is to Jack. And finally, for this season of Hannibal, episode 13, Mizumono. And so we start with Will talking to both Hannibal and Jack in separate conversations. And it would seem from Jack's side that they are trying to entrap Hannibal. Hannibal will reveal who he is to Jack, but Jack already knows who he is and will be going in armed with knowledge but also armed to the teeth, so that he can fight Hannibal if he needs to, but also he will have people in backup positions to take Hannibal out if needs be. Hannibal, however, thinks that Will is on the side of him, and that when Jack turns up, Hannibal is probably going to fight Jack, but Will be the one who determines who wins out of the two of them. But he hopes that Will is on his side, and obviously Jack hopes that Will is on his side. And so it's an interesting dynamic already, and we get a really cool shot in this as well. So as the cameras focus on both Hannibal and Jack, they do like a split screen, where they merge the face together so that half is Jack and half is Hannibal. However, when they use the same technique on Will, obviously they're going to be bringing just Will into the frame. It's Will having the same conversation in two different rooms. And so when they bring it together, and Hannibal and Jack both ask, will you do what needs to be done? Will's face comes together with a line down it, and you can see the slight difference between the two as he says, yes, I will. And I just find that shot really interesting and a really cool scene. Hannibal goes to see Bella, and she still seems to have a anger towards Hannibal. It's not so much in the tone of her voice, it's more sort of a disdain for him. The fact that he saved her when she wanted to die, she now feels like she's in this limbo because she's bedridden and she has to have an oxygen tank at all times, and she just feels like this isn't what she wanted. She knew this was what was coming, but it's not what she wanted. If she'd have had her way, she would be dead by now. But she knows that death is coming, and as she speaks to Hannibal, she asks him if, when the time comes, he will take care of Jack and make sure that he is okay. And of course, at this point, all we can think is, he's going to take care of Jack alright. Will speaks to Freddie Lowndes and tells her that the story that she has, he's happy for her to write about anything when it comes to him or Hannibal, but he wants to make sure that she doesn't ever write about Abigail. And Freddie believes that Will isn't sure that Will isn't going to survive this whole endeavour when it comes to Hannibal. Much later, he goes over to see Hannibal, and Hannibal starts throwing books down towards him. Hannibal's got this impressive library in it's in his study really, where he takes his patients. But on the shelves up above, he has a bunch of notebooks that he has taken notes on each of his patients. And at this point, he's just tossing them down to Will, including some of Will's journals that Hannibal wrote about. and Will is taking them over to the fire and they are burning them together to ensure that when the FBI come looking after whatever happens with Jack, but when the FBI come looking for him, Hannibal says that he will be gone, and none of the notes that he has about any of his patients will be there, especially the ones that they will be looking for. But at one point, as Will goes near Hannibal, Hannibal gets a scent off him. Again, that incredible nose of his picks up a scent, and the picture that he forms in his mind is Freddie Lowndes. And so, if she was dead, which we all thought she was, because she burnt up, he has now smelt a fresh scent of Freddie Lowndes on Will. Will speaks to Alana and she just seems to be sick to her stomach with the fact that all this time Hannibal has been this killer, and now everyone is finally starting to believe it, even though Will has been saying it all along. But when Alana asks Will, how do you know he's not goading you? You're the one who's setting this trap for him, but how do you know that he isn't trapping you? He tells her, I don't, but this is all we've got really. And so later because he's got to have dinner, Will and Hannibal have dinner. And first of all, I've just got to say that every time that Hannibal has dinner, it's for him and someone else, just maybe one, maybe two people. Obviously he has his big lavish dinner parties and what have you, but generally it's him and one other person, maybe two. And every time he puts on this massive, lavish dish that is stunning and visual and has to be brought in on a fucking Teasmade or a serving trolley or whatever you want to call it. And every time that he does, he cuts off the smallest little slither, puts it on the plate of the person who's eating it, then puts something on his own plate, and then they all sit down to eat. And it's the tiniest bit of food compared to what he's brought in, which is a banquet. It's fucking ridiculous. You've got to be sat there thinking, where's the rest of it going? That just can't be it. In the last episode, he made fucking sausages out of the pig that he got from Mason Verger. Didn't even touch them. Gave them a little slither of pork each, and they all sat down and ate it. Honestly, it's fucking bizarre. But the food looks incredible, so can't really complain. And so, like I say, Hannibal and Will are having dinner. Hannibal, now with his suspicions about Will, which he evidently has, he asks Will, is it worth it? We could just leave now. We could pack up our things, you could feed your dogs, leave Alana a note, and we could just go. You'd never see Alana, you'd never see Jack, and we'd have a different life somewhere else. But Will tells him Jack has to know. Jack has to know what we've done, who we are. That is the sort of closure that Will is looking for. But of course we know different. Will is trying to make sure that Hannibal speaks to Jack and reveals who he is so that he can be arrested. But Hannibal now has his suspicions and essentially is wheedling his way out of this trap. Another FBI agent, Miss Brunel, essentially tells Jack that she knows what he's been doing and she knows that Will Graham has killed someone. And not only that, the body ended up being mutilated, and the only person that could have done that was the killer. They know that they are trying to entrap Hannibal, and she tells him that there will be an investigation, and that Jack essentially must hand in his badge and gun right now. Which he does, and he's escorted from the FBI officers. This is all before he goes over to see Hannibal. Alana tries to plead with this woman, played by Cynthia Nixon, the one from Sex and the City. Miranda, I think it was. And she's talking to her and tells her that they still need Jack and Will on this case because they're the only ones who can bring Hannibal in. Hannibal's dangerous, but nobody else wants to see it. And of course, she will only deal with the evidence that she has in front of her, not the fact that they've been looking at this guy for months. She tells Alana that she'll get an arrest warrant. She'll check every bit of his house. But Alana tells her that's useless. That's already happened. Nothing was brought up. And so Miss Brunel tells Alana that it doesn't matter. The only two that we can arrest right now are Will and Jack. And that is exactly what we are going to do. As they send cars over to Will's house, Jack is on his way to go and meet Hannibal at Hannibal's place. Will gets a call from Alana and she tells him that they're going to arrest him. And at that point, Will sees the cars coming up his drive. He takes his gun, takes a jacket, and runs. But as he does, he calls Hannibal and says the two words that Hannibal said to Garrett Jacob Hobbs all those many months ago. They know. And so here it comes, the fight that we've been waiting for, and it's just as good as it was the first time I saw it. So Jack turns up at Hannibal's, and they talk about their friendship and how this is the clearest moment of them all. And just as Jack goes to take his gun out, Hannibal picks up a knife, throws it directly at Jack's hand, and it goes straight through it. Now, obviously, Hannibal is impeccable when it comes to his knives. He's a chef after all, but also he knows how to cut up a body. And so the throw is absolutely perfect, and it goes straight through Jack's hand. Jack pulls it out, and that's how they begin to fight. But what we didn't see in the first episode is Alana comes to the house. She sees the door is open, she walks in, she hears the commotion, she calls the cops and tells them that there's been shots fired. Just at the point when Jack has Hannibal down and thinks that he is finished with him, Hannibal picks up a piece of glass and stabs Jack in the neck, puncturing his artery. And so Jack is now bleeding out, with this piece of glass still stuck in his throat. He runs off into the pantry so Hannibal can do no more damage, and he puts his feet against the door and his back against the wall. At that point, Jack, who always has a tie on him, unties his tie and ties it around his neck to cut off the blood flow as best as possible. Alana comes into the kitchen and tells Hannibal, "Look, you don't need to do this. Where's Jack?" And he tells her, "He's in the pantry." By this point, Hannibal has two knives in his hands. He is trying to batter down this door, and he is covered in blood. It's the most un-Hannibal we've seen him so far. He looks insane. He tells Alana he wishes that she didn't have to see him like this, and that he also didn't think that he would be saying goodbye to her. She's got her gun drawn, she's pointing it at Hannibal, and he tells her, "You can walk away from this, and I won't come after you. Leave now, and you'll never see me again. Stay, and I'll kill you." Alana decides to stay, pulls the trigger of the gun, but it just clicks. And she realises she's fucked up. Hannibal knew about the gun, and he tells her as much. "I took your bullets." Alana runs off. She runs upstairs into one of the rooms, puts down her handbag, pulls out some more bullets, reloads the gun, and as he comes towards the door, she shoots twice, shouting, "I found more bullets." As she shoots one last time, we see a figure in the distance on her shoulder. The figure walks towards her slowly, and as Alana turns, she sees Abigail for the first time in months. Abigail tells her that she's so sorry and pushes her out the window. Will arrives and finds Alana outside, just laying in the rain, bleeding out. He calls for EMT backup, and as he heads into the house, she whispers to him that Jack's in there. He heads in, finds Hannibal in the kitchen, but first, he sees Abigail for the first time as well. She tells him that she's sorry and that she did it because he told her to. He's manipulated her just the way he has done with everyone else. But before he can actually go to see her, Hannibal turns up behind him. He embraces Will, but at the same time takes out a curved blade, sticks it in his belly, and jaggedly runs it across there. How Will does end up spilling his guts all over the floor, I don't know, but he is bleeding out heavily. Once Hannibal lets go of him, he falls back, and Hannibal tells him that essentially it could have been them that they were leaving altogether. As Will bleeds out, he tells him he has one last thing to do. Will knows what it is straight away, and can't believe that he's going to do it. He asks Abigail to come to him, and she does. And at that point, he sticks the curved blade in her neck and finishes the job that her father did. He cuts her open deeply, and she also begins to bleed out. She falls down next to Will, and he can do nothing to save her. Hannibal heads outside, sees Alana laying out there, washes his face in the rain, and heads off into the night. And that is the end of Season 2 of Hannibal. Fucking hell, this TV show. I genuinely don't know how it didn't get a fucking 4th series, because they should have signed it up for a 3rd and 4th at this point. It's brilliant. I thought it got lost a little bit in the 2 previous episodes with the whole Mason Verger bit, but even that was still compelling. I just didn't have a lot to talk about during it. But this fucking episode is brilliant. I can't praise it enough of how visually stunning it is, how I laugh at that because my friend always say it's visually stunning if it's dog shit storyline. That's generally the vibe from the media. If it's visually stunning, it's dog shit. But this isn't. It's visually stunning, it's cleverly made, it's well written, it's brilliantly acted. And the only thing you can say for it is the pacing throughout the episodes is slow. But the actual pacing throughout the series is ridiculous. How quick it snaps from next to next to next. And so, I love this show. I'm so glad I'm doing it. I really am. I've said it before and I know I have. But I am so glad that I'm revisiting this show because it is beautiful and it is gory. And I think a fourth series would have helped this cement its legacy as one of the best TV shows ever. However, we are not going to be revisiting Hannibal for, I think, another 2 seasons, so we'll have to leave him there for now. But as for the next episode, we will be doing National Treasure: Edge of History. And I am excited to go into this show because of my friends over at the National Treasure Hunt podcast, and just to see exactly what they've said from that show, because I haven't watched it since I first watched it. So I want to just see if everything that they've been talking about sort of holds up. I don't doubt it for a minute. Those girls know what they're doing. But I remember the show gladly. So hopefully we can get into that next week. But as for today, apart from the corporate shilling that I'm going to have to do right now, which is please subscribe to my Patreon. It's a couple of dollars a month, but it really helps me out. It really helps this podcast, and you can hear me talk about Game of Thrones. So if you like my voice, you like Game of Thrones, fuck it, do that. But as for today, I thank you for your time. I hope you're all doing well out there, and I shall speak to you soon. Bye. And that is it for now, amigos. And yes, I am as angry as you are at me for that sentence, but I hope you enjoyed the show and had some fun along the way. It means a lot that you are listening and supporting me. This is an independent podcast after all, and doesn't get a lot of backing, so it's great to know that you're out there, you're listening. And if you want to come talk to me on any of the platforms I'm on, just come say hi. I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and I'm even a little bit on TikTok. I don't post that much, but I'm on there. And you can also drop comments in the comment sections on any of the platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podbean, wherever you get podcasts from. But as always, thank you for your time, and I will speak to you soon.